everybody's settled. Okay, so I will not be doing this in Polish. I have a hard time with Polish place names. I don't even know how to say thank you. I should probably learn that. Germany, as you know, is very close by. Berlin, where I live, is very close by, and I haven't in 6 years learned how to say thank you in Polish. That's pretty bad. I'm sorry. See, that's why. It's kind of tricky. We'll practice it after. Oh, sorry, that's really loud. We'll practice it after. So, my name is Tiffany, and that's me on Twitter, and I work at SoundCloud. Have you heard of SoundCloud? Hands up if you know what that is at all. Okay, I have stickers later, and I have my business card if you want to come and talk to me about SoundCloud for any reason. Berlin's really close by. So cutting the fat, when to use Ajax and when to reload. So this talk is about being pragmatic, and I don't know if pragmatic is a common English word, but it just means being realistic. It's about, you know, we have all these technologies that we could use, and sometimes it's not realistic. It's not economical to use them. So this is about being realistic and economical, and it's also about reducing technical complexity of web applications when you can. Raise of hands if you are a web application developer, if you would call yourself a web programmer, yeah? And keep your hands up and put your hands up if you've ever written JavaScript, ever. Okay, some more hands. Okay, so you guys are all web developers, if you put your hands up for JavaScript. So this talk is also about using interaction design in order to make choices between Ajax and reloading. So there was a conference maybe last summer, I think. By last summer, I mean the other last summer. And it was called the Throne of JS, and it had sort of one premise. The Throne of JS is focused on answering the question on every web developer's mind. Which framework? Apparently this is what everybody is thinking about. And I'm here to say, yeah, web applications are really commonplace, and we have all these frameworks to choose from. And I would say question the premise of this. Specifically, we need to step back and ask ourselves, why don't we reload the page? We're building all these applications where we don't reload the page. We have to ask why. Exactly what is the cost of using Ajax, and what benefit does it have? Because all of these frameworks are trying to solve a technical problem, but what if we could just avoid those problems entirely? So in this talk, what to expect, I'm just going to review some terminology and talk about the benefits and the costs of Ajax explicitly, and also talk about a pragmatic approach, talk about a realistic way of deciding this. Okay, so Ajax versus reload. What does that mean? Okay, so back in the early 90s, all web pages were static and all links were blue. And when you hovered over them and clicked on a link, the whole page would reload. Remember that? In the second half of the 90s, JavaScript was introduced, and the XML HTTP request was introduced, which allowed content to be sent and loaded asynchronously without reloading the whole page. And we called this Ajax. And this was when this word was invented, it was around the time that Google Maps and Gmail came out, and our minds were all totally blown. And what this allows us to do is to reload just one part of the page. And originally this was for like loading ads and news tickers and stuff, but that's not that interesting. What's more interesting is when you load content based on the user's interaction, which we've all seen. Here's Facebook. So my friend asks, what's the name of that restaurant? And there's a box, a form element where I can enter a response, so I start typing. And I say, Jindale. And then I get there and I enter a web address. That's cool. And I don't do anything, but in the background, that page is loaded and content is displayed. I haven't done anything, it just loads automatically. And it adds to my message, and then I press enter, and it doesn't reload, and it does that. So that's obviously what Ajax is, but what's important here is that I didn't ever stop writing. I didn't ever lose context of where I was. So Ajax, the whole point of it is that it maintains context. So what I mean by context. So context is the answer to the question, where are you in the application? Not like, where are you, I'm on the street, or I'm in the toilet, or something. But where are you in the application? That's the context. So some examples of what I mean are, you might be looking at a user profile, or a news feed, or the checkout if you're buying something, or a slideshow. And each one of these I'm going to call a context. It's a different place where you might be that are very different from each other. So this is a bit weird, but I would say that this is two different contexts. One of them is me, and one of them is someone else named Sun Moon. These are two different contexts. One is me, and one is Sun Moon. Then there's the idea that there's multiple parts of the same context. So here I am filling out a form, and first you fill it out, and then there's error checking, and then it's okay, and this is all one context, even though it's different pages. You're kind of still doing one thing. So your application is going to have all these different parts to it, and they're all going to be different features and different pieces of information, and it's sort of your job to figure out how they all fit together. Maybe it's not your job how they fit together, but it might be the designer's job to say, these features belong together, or this data belongs together. And then I'm calling all of these groupings contexts. So all these different things come together, and designers need to decide and understand how things fit together and then tell you that. So if you're the designer, it's your job to say, these things belong together conceptually, and this is something else. You have to make that distinction. And usually they do that with screens. They'll say, everything on this screen goes together, and everything on this screen goes together, and those are two different things. So the tricky part is how we transition from one thing to the other. How do you go from one screen to the other screen? How does that happen? And these are the transitions between them. And specifically, Ajax could control the transitions, or maybe it doesn't control the transitions. And that's kind of going to be the whole idea, is that sometimes you cross these boundaries, and Ajax controls it, and sometimes reloading does it. So, yeah, this is just saying that there's different, I think we can skip this slide. So, before I said that Ajax allows you to maintain context, it allows things to stay on the screen while you're doing something. And when we have lots of Ajax, we call that a fat client. So now I'm going to define that, in case you don't know. So what is a fat client? How is it different than a thin client? So for the purpose of this discussion, the client is the code, the JavaScript that runs in the browser. And there's a server, and then there's some network, and then there's the client. So a thin client has all this data and all this logic, whether it's Python or PHP or Ruby or whatever, and then it sends it over the network, and then it presents it. The browser displays it. A fat client has data only, and then it sends data over the network. It might be JSON, or it might be templates. And then all of the logic is in the front, and it makes the presentation. So that's fat client, thin client. And as we talk about these fat clients, often the topic of a native experience comes up. That means, how does it feel? Does it feel like an iOS app? Does it feel like an Android app? And what are people talking about when they talk about a native experience? Normally, what they're talking about is controlling the transitions. So talking about, I wanted to flip and zoom and slide and fade and all these things you can do in a native application that's hard to do on a web page. That's usually what we're talking about. We're talking about, does it feel slow or janky, or does it slide or not? Arguably, there's other things that it could be considered, but mostly it's about these transitions. Does it feel like fluid? So then this comes to the question of single-page apps or fat clients. Are they awesome or are they not awesome? That's the question. So people think that they're very sexy, but they're also really nasty. So, how did this happen? So we have single-page apps, and once upon a time, if the URL changed in the browser, the page would reload. That used to be what happened. But then we made these rich applications, and we ran into this problem where you could be going through the states of the application, and you could reach a state that you can only reach by clicking around. And so we thought, okay, well, now we can't use the back button anymore. That's a problem. Okay, so why don't, if we also want to use the back button, we also want to say, here's a URL, and if you click it, it's going to take you somewhere, and we call that deep linking. Okay, so then what are the complications? We thought, well, how can we fix this? I know, we'll use a hash bang. That'll solve everything. Well, maybe we could use a JavaScript router to listen to the routes, and then maybe we could use window history to fix this problem. I don't know, frameworks. It just becomes complicated. There's all these problems related to history and where you are and how you got there. And frameworks are trying to solve this problem. But this was not a problem before we started using Ajax. So, okay, why did we want to use Ajax again? Okay, let's just really lay it out. So, problems that a fat client solves. Continuous interaction. This is the idea that as you're typing, something happens. Transitions between the contexts. That's the idea that you could load something and fade it in or slide it. For incremental loading, so you could load part of the page and it feels like something's happened while the really important thing is loading. So that's something else you can use Ajax for. And reduce network traffic. Presumably you only send data and not all the presentation. So most of these, I would call these design problems. Continuous interaction, transitions, incremental loading. This is something that designers want to make it feel better. So what problems does it cause? Routing. Suddenly, the browser used to be in charge of deciding what meant what, and suddenly your application needs to know what URL means what. So this introduces a problem. History. Keeping track of where you were and how to get back there, that used to be the browser's problem, and suddenly it became your problem. Caching and garbage collection. If you're going to just keep loading things and keep them in memory, you have to decide when to get rid of it. All of the computation is out of your control. So you put all of the burden on the browser to do all the work, when previously your server used to do all the work and just give output to the browser. So these are all technical problems. They're not design problems. They're developers' problems. So designers are like, oh, I want all these features. And then developers are like, oh, that's a lot of problems that you just introduced to me. One sec. Despite how this looks, it's actually just tonic. It used to have gin in it, but I drank all the gin. And then put more tonic in. Okay, so let's look again at the design problems that a fat client solves. Let's just quickly, so continuous interaction, transitions between contexts, and incremental loading. So that one, continuous interaction, I'm calling that maintaining context. This one, incremental loading, I'm calling that establishing context. So again, Ajax allows us to control contexts, but it also adds complexity. So if we look at all the problems that that Ajax is meant to solve, which of them is most important? So if we could only fix one problem and we couldn't fix the others, what would it be? So I would say that the most important problem is continuous interaction. This was the reason we invented Ajax. This is the reason we had it. It's the one that's sort of most important. And the least important one? Transition between contexts. The whole idea of switching from one context to the other is that it's a new context. It's a new mental place. It's a new whole idea. Transitioning between them is not nearly as important as the other two. So basically all I'm saying is if there's a new context, you need to reload the page. That's it. That's the whole thing. Like if you have to choose new context, reload the page. But then you're like, no transitions, but like those are really cool and they're really sexy and they're really nice, but they're not essential. And you might think, but all of the cool kids have single page applications. They're all the cool kids are doing it. So there's one very cool kid. I know earlier the question was asked, who uses GitHub? But now, like seriously, if you know GitHub, put your hand up. Yeah? Yeah? Who knows? You got a GitHub account? You know? Yeah? Okay. Your job later is to get a GitHub account. That's like your job. So, yeah. You should get a GitHub account. But let me just show you what I mean exactly by this. So I'm gonna show you exactly what I mean in terms of new context means reload the page. I'm gonna show you. So you can follow, this is a video. So you can see it's on GitHub here. And I'm just gonna open a console at the bottom. And I'm gonna go to the network tab. And I'm gonna show documents. And every time the page reloads, this is a new line. But if it doesn't reload, then it just stays there. So you can follow along. So here we are. We're on Yarn. I'm going to click repositories. The page has not reloaded because we're looking at the context of Yarn. Okay? So now we're going to go to a repository. And the page did reload because now we're in the context of a repository. And here's a list of all the files. And as we click, it does not reload. It just sort of shows us the back button works, all of this, because we're in the context of the repository. We go to the commits, it's considered a different context, it reloads, pull requests, the page reloads. Here we have a list that's filtered by open. If we click closed, it doesn't reload, it just reloads the content. So sometimes it reloads and sometimes it doesn't. So let's go to a pull request. And here we have discussion, commits, and files changed. And if I flip between them, the page is not reloading. And if I go to the discussion, I might scroll down and commit and files change. So as I'm in here, I could make a comment right in the interface. He was saying how sexy the UI is. This is what he's talking about. So you can start leaving a comment. You're like, what? Yeah, that looks good. Okay, but before I save this comment, let me just see if anybody else made this comment. Scroll down. Okay, nobody else made this comment. So I'm like, okay, yeah. See my other comment. Right. So the comment, is it still there? Yeah. It's still there. Because the page has not reloaded because we're still in the one pull request. So let's go to another repository. So the page reloaded because we switched repositories. Because why would you be in the middle of something and then go somewhere else? And if we go back here, we can see that the comment I made isn't there because I didn't save it. Because why would you be in the middle of something and then switch to something else entirely? So GitHub has made the decision that when it matters, they don't reload the page, and when it doesn't really matter, they reload the page. So question, should you use Ajax or should you reload the page? So the number one thing I want to say is, you can limit your demand for Ajax. You can use Ajax all over the place, but as a designer, if the designer comes to you, you should say, this is important to me and this is not important to me. And let the developer decide how feasible it is. So how do you do that? You find all of the little interaction points. Everywhere the user clicks, you could be reloading something or you could be doing Ajax. So you find all the interaction points. And for each one of those, you find out, am I crossing over a context boundary? And if I am, I could reload the page then. And then lastly, the question is, does your framework actually minimize your technical costs? This is what you should ask. You shouldn't say which framework is sexiest, or which framework shares all of my political ideals. It should instead be, does it actually minimize your technical costs? So last question. Single page apps? Yes, I think they're really cool. Monolithic apps? No. Okay, that's all. Thanks.